Well, the question today is, should we buy a cheap power meter instead of an expensive one? Now, there's a number of power meters on the market now, and there's pedal power meters, there's crank power meters, which is the arm, and then there's the internal crank power meters, and there's even the old power tap, which is the hub, but they're not very popular anymore. So really we have three types of power meters that most people are using. That's the pedal one, that's the one where the one crank arm is changed, like the 4-eye and the stages, and then you have something like the SRM and the Quarks, which are built into the crank set. So should you go for something like a 4-eye, which is a pretty cheap power meter? It's been on the market for a while, and it's one of the cheaper ones. And what are the pros and cons of actually opting for something that is cheaper than some of the other brands? Now, my good old mate over there in the Eastern States, Shane Miller, just did a review of the 4-eye, and it's the version 3 software, and it looks like 4-eye have done some significant work on trying to get this unit to be a bit more competitive. It's got a very good battery runtime, and they've worked with the software a fair bit. But even though they've done this, Shane Miller did pick up some shortcomings compared to something like the Ferrero Assiomia, which is a pedal-based power meter, and he found that one of the biggest problems was with the cadence sensor. And this sort of makes sense because it's on the arm, and if you're doing a slower cadence, it might have trouble to pick it up. Plus also we have parasitic loading in those cranksets, depending on if they're perfectly uniform. If the crank's not perfectly uniform, it doesn't give a perfect measurement. So there's a few disadvantages with that type of design. But the real thing is even though Shane Miller has shown there's some deficiencies with the 4-eye, in the real world, does it really make that much difference for the average rider that just wants to use the power meter to see how much watts he's putting out and being able to pace himself? He's not there to try and compare it with some absolute figures, or he's not in a team where the whole team needs to make sure that the power meters are reading similar. Will this 4-eye do the job for you? Well, the thing is when we watch people like DC Rainmaker and also Shane Miller, what you got to remember is they're not doing an accuracy test. When we talk about accuracy, this plus or minus 1%, that's not even an accuracy figure. That's a variance of the product. So what the manufacturer is saying is that it won't vary from its reading more than plus or minus percent. It's not an accuracy measurement. It's not like they're saying at 200 watts, it measures 201.5 watts. So it's not an accuracy measurement. It's not being calibrated or giving you an error or a correction for that power meter. So in reality, we don't really know if any of these power meters are really that accurate. If we compare a number of them and they're very similar, we can say, hey, look, in the averages of those meters, if they've been made similar, they appear to be reading around about the same amount. But it is not a accuracy or a calibration of those units. And I would probably argue that at the lower end, they're probably all a bit rough when it comes to what the actual real value is in watts. But saying that, are we really getting something that's that accurate what we read on the cycle computer? And we know that when we set up the cycle computer, it's an averaging of 3 seconds or 5 seconds, whatever you want to set it to. So it's not an instantaneous reading, even though Shane Miller and DC Rainmaker show that the line or the graph of peaks and points where the power meter is putting out the power. So does it really make that much difference if you're getting an average on the headset? And even Shane Miller admitted if you use different brands, they're going to be slightly different. Should we really be worrying about this absolute, like if it's reading 255 or 254, 253 or 256, you've just like that few out? Because if you've ever had a power meter, you know it doesn't actually, when you're riding along, it doesn't actually sit at a wattage like 205 and you're just riding along at 205. It keeps moving around and jumping up and down. And as you put a bit more in it, it lags slightly because of the 3-second average. And then you get the figures. And I've got a single-sided power meter on one bike and I've got a dual-sided power meter on another bike. And they're Garmin and Look power meters. So does it really matter if you just want to use this power meter as a pacing tool, say like when you're climbing up a hill and you know you can put out 250 watts. So as long as you're staying around about that 240, 250, and you'll see it fluctuate as your gradient fluctuates and your power and your cadence changes, it fluctuates. So when we look at it as Shane Miller's looking at it quite technically and deep and saying that it lags a bit when you get out the seat and you're sprinting and all those sorts of things, doesn't really matter, because if you're sprinting for a short distance, does it really matter that it's jumping around? Because if you're sprinting, I'm telling you, it's going to be jumping around maybe about 100 or 50 to 100 watts. Does it really matter that this thing is maybe a little bit laggy or not a little bit laggy? You just want to have some sort of indication like, hey, look, I know I can hit 1200 watts and I can hold that for 20 seconds. That's all you want to know. And you just want to know how far away from the finish line you are to be able to go into that sprint, put out your 1200 watts for that 20 seconds and get over the line. So in the real world, these cheaper power meters are probably going to do the job almost as good as another power meter, as long as you're not trying to compare absolute values with someone else, or you've got a team and you're trying to keep those things equal, because you may get variances if you're looking at your data afterwards. But if it's just you and you're using that power meter and you are training with it, and you know from that reading on that computer with that power meter, you can do this much for this long, then it's going to be a tool that's going to give you some benefit. So in conclusion, what you need to weigh up is the money you're saving versus what the application is you're using it for. Now, if you're competing, you have a team and you're competing at quite a high level, you may need to get a same power meter as someone else. And you might even be sponsored, or you're getting some discount by buying a certain brand and you're all using the same brand, and that's great. But if you're just a guy who goes on sportives and you just want to be able to pace yourself up hills because you want to measure how much your fitness is and so forth, these cheaper power meters, I believe, are going to do the job just fine, because those in-depth analysis like Shane Miller and DC Rainmaker are 100% accurate. But I don't think the way that these systems work and the variables that they have in them really make that much difference, because when you're actually riding in there and you're looking at the screen in front of you, those figures are jumping around anyway. You just want to know, hang on a sec, if I can hold 250, you just want to keep it around about 240, 260. It'll jump around, and you just know that, if you get to 270, 280, you've got to back off a little bit, and it'll do that job for you quite well. So the other question is, how much are you saving if you buy something like a 4i, which is a one-sided power meter? Now, of course, that has some disadvantages in the design. And one of the disadvantages is if you're a person that's not got an even stroke, like you've got quite a big difference, like maybe you've got one leg that's a lot shorter than the other or something like that, and your legs are very uneven, then you might actually get an error, because all it does is multiply by 2. But even then, it's the same condition. You might actually get a wrong reading, but the variance, or if you're comparing it to apples, which is the same bike and the same computer, then it will still work. It'll still give you that pacing tool that you're after. And the other disadvantages with these ones like 4i is that when they put them on different types of cranks, especially carbon cranks, they can actually become more expensive, and then they're just not worth buying. So if you've got a Shimano system and you're putting it on, you're going to use the 105 Shimano crank, then yeah, they're pretty competitive. But I had a quick look at some of the pricing, and if you look at something like the Ferrera Asioma, it's not double the price. I would probably say it's maybe 20 to 30% dearer if you shop around. So it's not like as if you're saving like heaps. You're not getting it for half price of something like a Ferrera Asioma, which a lot of people have rated as a very, very good unit. Now, you've also got something like the Garmin. They're a bit dearer. Then you've got the Wahoo Speedplay pedals. They're a bit dearer even still, even in the single-sided form. And then obviously you've got something like a Look, which is very expensive. So that is the thing you need to weigh up, what your application is. If you're sort of a person just like me, you ride around and you maybe do a few sportives, and you challenging yourself, or you're just trying to get a bit fitter, or you're climbing up a hill and you know you can hold this much because you've been riding with that power meter for some time, and you know you can hold that wattage. You can start at the bottom of the hill and the top of the hill, start your 250 watts, and you know that you're going to get to the top of the hill and you're not going to blow up. whilst if you didn't have a power meter, you might be pushing it or chasing someone, get a little bit carried away, and then you blow up, and then you have to back off, and you're not going to get as fast a time, or your training's not going to be as effective as it would be if you had a power meter. Well, anyway, guys, that's where I'm going to leave it. And remember to smash that like button, and also subscribe down below, please. And another thing that would be really great if you could do it is also share the video to some other cycling friends, and that would also help them get to interact with some of this information and technology. Okay, guys, I'll see you next vid. Cheers.